Hello everybody.
Next up we visit the West Midlands, where we'll be hosted by Wolverhampton Wanderers. Kick off on Saturdays at 3 p.m. Don't get used to it, we've got a run of Sundays on its way. Loads of train strikes up and down the country, so doubly check before you leave. So Wolves then, another side for which inconsistency could be said to be their middle name. It isn't, of course. Wolverhampton Inconsistency Wanderers would sound a bit silly. However, apart from a 3-game winning run over Christmas, they've not been able to put much of a run together at all. Of their last 6, they've won 3, drawn 2 and lost 1. They started that sequence with a 2-1 win at Spurs. Doesn't everyone do that? This was followed by a 1-0 home win over Sheffield United, a 3-0 defeat at Newcastle, a 2-1 win at home to Fulham, a 2-0 reverse at Villa, and last weekend they picked up a point in a 1-1 draw up at Burnley. All of that has left them with 42 points from the 30 played so far. After the mad game at Stamford Bridge the other night, that's left them in 11th place, which is 4 places and 3 points behind us, albeit they have a game in hand. So they're sort of hanging on to the shirt tails of a potential European place, though I think even their support would probably concede that it's probably a long shot. Like most clubs, their spending was severely limited during the window, though Daisy was forced to do some digging around this week in respect of a couple of new arrivals. The fee that brought Fletcher Holman in from Eastbourne Borough was probably low enough to be considered nominal by Wolves, and as decent by the National League South side, for whom he scored 10 in 19 matches across all competitions this season. 19-year-old Holman was originally signed with a view to participation in the academy setup, but has been included in the first team squad on occasion, albeit he hasn't yet made his first team debut. The other new arrival was also a teenager, in the form of French-Gabonese midfielder Noah Lemina. Another 19-year-old, he's arrived on an unusual loan deal from Paris Saint-Germain. He will stay at Wolves until the end of the season, when there'll be an option for Wolves to purchase for €1 million. What is unusual about the deal is that it's the player who will decide whether or not the option will be exercised. If he wants to stay, Wolves will have to buy him. PSG will retain 25% of any future sales proceeds. Although he's but a babe in arms, he won't be missing his family much, as his brother Mario is also at the club. This match will see a couple of reunions take place. Manager Gary O'Neill was part of the club during the period 2011 to 2013, having been brought in by his former boss Sam Allardyce. O'Neill was part of the squad that got promotion in 2012 and took over at the beginning of this season at Molineux. The other familiar face will appear in the shape of Craig Dawson. Dawson was a figure popular with both players and supporters. He often chipped in with the odd important goal here and there, and it was notable that he did us a favour by hanging on until the winter window when he needed a transfer for personal and family reasons. Always seems like an all-round good egg to me. On the injury front, definitely out will be Neto, whose troublesome thigh will keep him out of action until May, and Hee Chan Hoang, the happy shopper Song Hu Min, whose own thigh will take a couple more weeks to heal. There's a 50-50 chance that Craig Dawson, the aforementioned, will be available for selection. His groin has been playing up of late. I'm fairly sure he'll get a decent welcome from the away support should he make an appearance. And finally, Jean-Richner Belgrade is also a doubt, his knee giving him a less than even chance of being available. Enough of them. Let's move on, shall we, to the wild and wacky world of association football. And Tottenham's accounts have been published showing that they've lost over £220 million over the last 3 years. This is more than double the amount that they're allowed to lose under the profit and sustainability rules. Points deduction? Of course not. Through some clever accounting, they write off over £70 million a year of the cost of the toilet bowl against their losses to keep them in the good boy zone. That's the ground that you and I contributed approximately £30 million towards, by the way. They're also seeking outside investment to cover those losses. One sort that they might have tapped up for a few bob was Joe Lewis, whose family trust has a significant stake in the club. Unfortunately, he's going to be tied up over the next few years, having been given probation by a court sentencing him for insider dealing the other day. Although Lewis and his company faced a combined fine of $49 million, one shouldn't feel too sorry for him. The $5 million he's personally on the hook for will make only the shallowest dent in his $6 million fortune. And so to us. It's a funny old game on Tuesday night, I thought. For a few minutes, I thought they were going to raise their game for their cup final as they stormed into the lead. However, it seemed that their players are as dim as their supporters. My theory is that this whole stats industry that has grown up within the game has a lot to answer for. The stats for possession, which nobody bothered with in the good old days, seem to have gained some sort of self-important mythical status, which the ignorant seem to worship, almost more than the good old-fashioned goal. Now, the average Tottenham supporter does seem to struggle with complex concepts. Actually, they seem to struggle with simple ones. But to hear them mither on about how much possession Spurs had, you'd have thought they were awarding bonus points or something. The same attitude seemed to have transferred itself to their players, who seemed to think that simply keeping hold of the ball and playing it square across the pitch the moment an opponent was encountered would somehow give them the points. That theory is, of course, complete and utter balderdash. If you must worship at the altar of Opta, you need at the very least consider how many shots were taken. And the number for that for Spurs was lower than Jamie Carragher's IQ, and was brought into sharp focus by the fact that it was probably the same as the number of shots we had, with about half as much of the ball. And don't get me started on XG or whatever it's called. To sum up, and mainly for the benefit of Spurs fans having this read to them, if your team insists on spending 80 minutes plus passing the ball from wing to wing, don't moan at us when we sit down, open up a deck chair and sit back with the Times crossword while you do it. Also, for the benefit of Spurs fans, the Times crossword is a bit like the ones you're familiar with, only with words instead of pictures. One final word on the match. Isn't it nice to be talking about a match decided on the relevant merits of the two teams involved, rather than by which side of bed the referee got out of? Mr. Brooks wasn't perfect. He was a little bit too gullible to the going-to-ground habits of one or two of Spurs players on occasion. However, when mistakes are made, you could usually see why he might have made an honest error. On to Saturday, and on the injury front at our end, Areola will be missing once more as his tweaked groin heals up, whilst Laguerre, whose injury was listed only as other, which covers anything from dandruff to dengue fever, is rated as 50-50, with his situation being monitored and probably being treated with Head and Shoulders. Not injury related, but Alvarez will be available for selection, having served his too-much ban for receiving 10 yellow cards. A suspension that, as far as I can see, is 100% heavier than any employee of PGMOL has received for their antics this season. And on to the prediction. Well, which West Ham turn up is the question. If the one which played so well for two-thirds of the Newcastle game before collapsing like a penalty-seeking Salah as soon as the referee realised Newcastle weren't going to be able to do it by themselves, make an appearance, I can see this being a useful 3 points to be picked up. So on that basis, the £2.50 I was going to send to Joe Biden as recompense for all the crockery nicked by journalists from Air Force One will instead be dispatched by Pushbike, known Force One, to Winston's Turf Accountancy Emporium and placed an away win by a 2-1 scoreline. Enjoy the game.